Welcome to Give Me Credit. I'm J.S. Waldo, author of Mortgage Lending Explained, and we are here today with our credit guru, John Mackey, author of Credit Genius. You can find us both on Substack. You can find John Mackey at creditgenius.substack.com, and you can find me at jswaldo.substack.com. Today we have another guest, so we're going to jump in and start talking about some very interesting things. Most people think credit's just a tool, a score, a number, something that sits quietly in the background. But it's not quiet. It's watching, tracking, recording every move you make. When you pay, when you miss, how you spend, how you fall behind. And then it does something even more interesting. It decides what you're allowed to do next, where you can live, what you'll pay, whether you get approved or quietly denied without a real explanation. So here's the question nobody asks. What if credit isn't just measuring behavior? What if it's shaping it? What if it's training people, us, rewarding some patterns, punishing others, until millions of people start making financial decisions, not based on what's best for them, but based on what the system will approve? And here's where it gets uncomfortable. If that system makes a mistake, and we know it does, we talk about that often, who's responsible? Not the algorithm, not the database, not the automated response that comes back in 30 days telling you everything is verified. So who? Because when something controls access to housing, to jobs, to opportunity, and no one is clearly accountable, that's not just a financial system anymore. That's an ethical one. Today, we're not talking about scores. Surprise! Today, we're talking about ethics.
Let me introduce Professor Mr. Neil Tift, a longtime friend of mine since maybe about 1978. Both of us are so old, they've got to carbon date our burps. Professor Tift brings decades of experience designing, developing, and teaching ethics-focused coursework across universities, professional organizations, and real-world training environments. Over a nearly 40-year academic career, including 20 years as an adjunct professor at Metropolitan State University, along with 7 other colleges and universities in Minnesota and Arizona. He's designed, developed, and taught applied ethics, human service administration, and behavioral decision-making. His work centers on how ethics actually functions in practice, inside institutions, under pressure, and within systems that shape outcomes long before individuals make a conscious choice. On Give Me Credit now, we're focusing on that body of work, how the courses he designed, developed, and taught translate into understanding modern systems like credit reporting, lending, and debt collection, not as abstract philosophy, but as structured environments where incentives, training, and institutional design drive behavior. And that perspective isn't just academic. He's lived it as a father, stepfather, adoptive father, foster father, grandfather, and more. He spent decades navigating the real-world dynamics of responsibility, conflict, and decision-making that sits at the heart of the very ethics he teaches. So let me start out.
Welcome, Neil.
Thank you. Thanks, Johnny. I would also say I lived outside Washington, D.C. for 4 years working with a fatherhood program there. And I applied to teach ethics at several colleges there, but nobody wanted to teach ethics in D.C. So true story. Maybe
Unbelievable.
Maybe because I didn't have my PhD, but I brought it up at multiple schools, colleges and universities, and just no luck. But anyway, thank you for that kind introduction. Yes, I have been working.
So I'm just going to go directly into the first question, or JS's. And JS, go ahead. Let's start this off.
Okay, let's start off with the very first question. Data versus Humanity. Let's start there. Credit systems reduce people to data points, scores, ratios, histories. From an ethical standpoint, what is lost when human lives are reduced to statistical variables? That's hard to say that really fast. Statistical variables. And if that system consistently harms people through errors or opacity, who owns that harm? The designees, the operators, or the system itself? What do you think, Neil?
I think really what is lost is the human story. We know that systems work with computerized. Everything's computerized. So part of it depends on who sets the code, who develops the code, how it's applied. And then the idea is how are those decisions made? So we do have to look at the theory of what's going on, but then in the general application is the human side. And you mentioned those. You talked about how through loss, through so many different options, that people's lives can be destroyed. And I really think there needs to be more not understanding. I'm surprised. I'm surprised. I'm not surprising. I think we need more regulations. I'm not usually for a whole lot of regulation, but I do think we need to have opportunities for people who deal with applied ethics and who understand human behavior would be able to work with a system of technology. The folks, I'm going to go back just a little bit. We all use left brain, right brain theory. You know that brain development, understanding it is very important. People who work with technology, people who are attracted to credit union are right brained, and are left brained, and that's absolutely. Left brain is analytical, logical, hierarchical. It's very competitive. It's very yes, no, black, white. Right brain people, who are us, who are out there as consumers, and who are affected, need to have that right brain approach applied to that to say, how does this work? Why is this information shaped in this way that affects these? I'm a right brain male who realized right out of college in the 60s that I need to find a place to fit. And my fields are more nurturing and more cooperative in working with dads and working with homeless people. So I bring that. People call that soft and fuzzy and tree huggers and all that. They might call you whatever names you want. But I think the idea that we need to take up, we have to create opportunities to take what's being done now, but apply it in a way that now that with AI coming in, it's going to be even more important that we have the human perspective, the human story, that we have, how we understand. Let me give you an example. This is going to be, all right. Most people, when we make an ethical decision, it's very left brain. It's logical and analytical. Step one is gather all the facts. Step two are what are the options. Step three, who are the stakeholders involved. Step four, what might be the determine the options you have in making that decision. Step five, how will that affect the stakeholders. Step six, make a decision. Step seven, then evaluate if it worked or not. That's very logical left brain. Right brain is more, we're all in this together. I work with Native American families, Native American dads. Most of the Native families that I know are right brain. It's more circular. We're all in this together. It's much more cooperative. Right brain is cooperative, left brain is competitive. So as we look at how we're humanizing what we're talking about, and that tends to tick off technology because they want just yes or no answers, move on to the next question, yes or no answer. Ethics isn't always just a yes or no. Legal is a yes or no. So when we're looking at different factors, first factor typically, is it legal? But then the second one, is it ethical? And in my world, we make a distinction between ethical and moral. Ethical tends to be secular decision-making applied to right and wrong. Morals or morality is usually based on a spiritual or religious approach to that. And so whether we're talking about ethics or morality, we're talking about, do we take this left brain approach and say everybody has to follow that? Because when we go to the human side, to the personal side, to actually have the guts to say to the nurturing side, that won't happen. But we can say we need to look at when we're holding people accountable, we need to look at who's doing the coding, how the decisions are made, and then as a result of that, what are the implications when they code the incorrect way?
Okay, John, let's go with your next question,
Okay.
because I think he led right into it.
Yeah. Yeah. Credit scoring predicts future behavior using past patterns. Is it ethically acceptable to judge someone's trustworthiness based on probability instead of context?
Well, probability, yeah, it can be, but it shouldn't be a substitute for judgment. I mean, when you look at the two, judgment is different. Here, let me see that question again. Yes, for future behavior of past patterns. They can't, when we code, whoever determines the decision making as they go through in the credit industry, and I don't understand it very well because I'm one of those wishy-washy right brain folks. But when we look at how they're making those judgments, that needs to be really clear of what the priorities are. And when we talk about estimating risk, there's so many factors that come with estimating risk. If the people who are making those decisions are white, educated, heterosexual, able-bodied males, Protestant or Catholic, whatever, you look at all the factors of decision makers. Most decisions are made with a certain population. Now, clearly over the last 30 years, we've expanded more options in those areas. But if we're using that one stereotypical mindset for making judgments, how do we then apply that to people who don't fit in that? And again, I'm going to use my example with the population I've worked with the past 19 years. Say you have Native American clients. Well, one, a lot of them don't even have an address. If you don't have an address, then how do you judge? And then they'll say, well, they're not dependable, they're not reliable because they don't have stable housing. Well, they might have
that's the
stable
way
housing.
credit works. Correct. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And then you look at how the income as it's earned, and they don't maybe not have one income, but they might have multiple incomes. If you're an artist and you have different revenues of ethical, of legal, legitimate income, and that's your income, and you report that, but it's multiple streams, you're going, oh, that's too confusing. We're not going to go there. There's just so many biases that don't take into cultural variations and how it affects the client, the person. What do you call it? The credit. Who's the person we're talking about? Who's being denied credit? What's the term you use for that?
Well, that's the consumer.
Consumer. Thank you. Yeah. Big word.
The consumer's being denied the credit. The lenders are the one giving the credit.
Consumer. Okay.
And we're talking a lot about in our context is we're talking about algorithms. We're talking about AI. We're talking about the inhumane perspective. And I get exactly what you're saying. It takes out the differentials that we all have as individuals in our own ways, whether it's our culture, whether it's our family status, any of that. All that goes out the window. Our language.
Because if you work with a population of people that English is their second language, which is pretty common today.
It is.
For a lot of people looking to establish credit, and they have different words than we do, and they don't understand it. I worked with one person they were having a prescription filled, and it said once a day. Well, in Spanish, ONCE is 11, once. And so she thought it meant 11 meds per day, not once a day. And obviously some medical harm came. But it has to do with the language, their worldview, the people we're working with. And algorithms, I assume, don't take much into account other cultures, other variations. Well, we know about geographical differences. People living in a barrio versus on a reservation versus, say, New York City, one of the suburbs of New York City versus a rural farm in Iowa. I'm sure they have some ways to determine some of those factors for the algorithms, but my sense is probably, again, pretty black and white. And when we work with humans, it ain't black and white.
Okay. I want to move on here. But let me ask you a follow-up question to this. When no human makes the final call, only an algorithm, who is morally accountable for the outcome?
Um, I would say the, well, not the consumer, obviously. If if the algorithm is the one that makes a mistake, it isn't the consumer. So you have to go back up the chain. So if it isn't the person trying to buy a used car, who's the one that denied them that? And so I would say that's, I think, part of what we need when we're talking about having accountability in a system that isn't just 010101. That
Right.
we're talking about decision making that takes into account that we hold people accountable, we hold systems accountable, and systems are people. And so we need to look at the people we're working with. Who's the one? Somebody has to take responsibility if they made a
Right.
mistake.
And that, unfortunately, is why we're having this discussion, Neil, is
Right.
that we have the CFPB and they've basically been dismantled. And so our police of the
Yes.
system is now not there. And your 0101 leads me to my next question. A credit report functions as a person's financial identity, right? Everybody knows this. My question is it ethical though for private companies to control something that determines access to housing and jobs and insurance?
I would say we'd have to look at what are the alternatives. Is there an alternative to that? Because a lot of times when you're making ethical decisions, what are the options we have in making this decision? Okay, whether it's about our children or about our finances or our job or whatever. So I'd say one would be to explore what are other options in our system, or what could be the options in our system. I do know that where I have my money, I'm in a credit union. It's not a bank, it's a credit union where people own it themselves. And that's much more some people call that socialism, and we know that socialism is bad and all that. I'm more for the consumer. I'm for the little guy. My whole life, my whole career, my whole job, 56 years since I graduated from college, is been with the consumer, with the little person who needs to have their voice heard. So I'd say, if we haven't come up with alternatives, what could we come up with alternatives? Because I know, like in some countries, I know in some of the Muslim countries, it's unethical to charge interest for a loan. So I mean, there'd be no incentive for an institution like a bank if there was no payback, because then how would you pay the employees? But could we do some type of hybrid?
You're getting into it totally. It's a real interesting topic because technically Christianity doesn't accept or doesn't like interest rates. The Muslim faith certainly prohibits it, but they've got workarounds that they utilize.
Yeah, and we don't want to go too deep into that because
No, you're
what we're
right.
talking about there is we're talking about something outside of our system, and we need to stay focused on the system that we have to work with right now, which is really what we were talking about. I mean, at what point does private control over credit become public power without public accountability? I mean, that's really where we're at.
That's 100% right in my view, because we're giving private companies, Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, and believe it or not, Neil, all 40 of the others that scrape our data, and then they monetize it. But is it ethical for them to do that without letting people know that they're doing that and without having their authorization? Because that's happening.
It is. And ethics is, a lot of times ethics is in degrees. There is the absolutist. Absolute is some action is always right or it's always wrong. The consequential approach to ethical decision making is, well, it depends. Is it okay to do this? Well, it depends. Is it okay to do that? Well, then it depends. So when we're talking about the credit system or the credit people, whoever they are, I see that that's very much the absolutes. This is what we're doing, and what are you going to do to us about it? So that's what I'm saying. What are the alternatives and you're right, it should be within our culture, in our country. But what are the alternatives, and what would they look like? There would be an incentive to create something but not so that people are just a 7 or 8 or 10-digit number. And
Right.
I'm not
So
smart enough to have the answer.
ethics depend upon culture.
Well, the outcomes do depend upon culture. Yes, a very simple one. You have a 20-year-old and a 6-year-old, and you're in a rural community with only one crash cart to revive the person. In the white community, most would save the 20-year-old because he or she has the potential. In an indigenous community, they'd save the 60-year-old because he or she has earned that. The 20-year-old hasn't contributed anything to that society. So the decisions that are arrived at, depending on the situation, do depend on the culture, because you look at what the priorities of a culture are. And the priorities of the United States clearly have been capitalism at pretty much at any cost. And as we have progressed over these past several years, it's become much more black and white, much more cutthroat, in my opinion, much more you're on your own, much more greed driven, much more we have ours, and good luck finding yours.
Right.
Okay.
I know. Does that example make sense about the crash cart and the rural hospital?
Well, it does, but I'm having a mental battle between ethics and moral,
Yeah.
ethics and community. Ethics to me is, I guess, we can get into medical ethics. I'm not going there, but it's right or wrong.
Right. Good or bad, right or wrong. Yep. That's
right.
That's,
and we've got laws to define that here.
well, remember, the law is the basis. You have the basic. There, when it comes, there's ethics and morality. I mentioned ethics is secular, morality tends to be spiritual or cultural. Then you have community standards, and then you have law. Law is the basis. That's the minimum that's required, or the minimum that's allowed. Then above that, you have community standards. And when you're working with and seeing 0101 don't take into community standards. But when we're talking about ethical decisions, how do you allocate limited resources when you have different pools of populations that need the resources, but you only have enough to feed 10 children and you got 30 kids? What do you do? I mean,
yeah,
you volunteer in the food
Well,
bank.
I think we need to draw a line right here, and we need to keep that line very, very clear during this conversation.
Got
The
it.
credit system has nothing to do with morality. It's business. And in the system that our consumers are dealing with is the United States of America system is not morality. The question of ethics behind automation is really what this discussion is the base of. Where do we cross the line when it comes to automation? And I think you have a really good question for this, John. The next question.
Yeah, much of the system runs on automated approvals, flags, and dispute processes. Does automation eliminate accountability or just bury it where no one can see it?
I don't think automation removes accountability. I do think it redistributes it, and we need to see how what priorities it redistributes it to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
JS?
If we have millions of credit reports contains errors. This is something that John and I have covered quite often in our podcasts with attorneys and just the facts behind all the data that we review. Now, how much, in your opinion, Neil, how much error is ethically acceptable in a system that controls access to basic life necessities, housing? How much is acceptable? An error percentage.
That gets into degrees, and that gets into human decision making that is then determined by those that set up the algorithm, that create the algorithm and then put it into the code and then then implement it. And I would say when you're looking at error, again, you're going to have, it's going to depend on the consumer, because I've lost jobs and I've found another job, but I'm a white male. If a person who has limited skills, if you're a single mother or a single father and you got to be home a lot, there's so many factors that need to be considered, and realistically, we can't consider all of them. But there needs to be, I think, we benefit from a system that prioritizes, as we're looking at the errors, is there a way to determine which ones, again, you might have degrees, which ones are life-threatening, which ones are extremely important, and then those that are not so much. So for somebody, they might really need a car. For another one, it might be, well, I'm getting this for my teenage son or daughter, and it's nice, but if I don't get the credit, he or she can wait 6 months or a year. So a lot of it is depending on degree of need. It really depends on degree, and you can't it's hard to legislate degree of need. It's very hard to implement algorithms. They could if there was a priority, but it would.
Yeah, how do you do an automation of that, right? How do you do that? Yeah, I'd asked the follow-up, but I think you already answered it. There are degrees of priority.
Yes.
And even that can be very dependent on your opinion at the moment, right? So who's to say which one is ethical and which isn't? John, let's move on to your next question.
Okay. Consumers are expected to challenge and fix errors themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Is it ethical to force individuals to fight institutions to correct information about their own lives?
Again, I think it has to do with degree. I really think it has to do with the degree of what it was, the number of errors, the degree, the impact that it has on the consumer. And again, I don't know. Personally, we know how to measure it, but I don't know how the system would do that. I do think there need to be consequences if there's consistent errors that have a significant negative impact on anybody. Doesn't depend on the population, but I think there need to be consequences. And when the CFPB was gutted, that was one of our best protections. And
the FDCPA, correct. They literally were gutted. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you talking about the CFPB?
Oh, CFPB. Yes, sorry.
Yes.
CFPB.
Yeah. And when we look at that, the big thing was who benefited from that. It wasn't the consumer. So again, we have to go with degree of need and who makes the decisions. And then at what level do you step in and say, we need to increase the consequences? There need to be ways that if someone is harmed, that we eliminate that harm and we have something to reduce the potential for that pattern of harm to continue within that organization, within that company or institution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. JS, we're almost running out of time here. Do you want to
We are. I think that, Neil, are you open to coming back and continuing this conversation?
Absolutely.
We still have like 5 or 6 more questions for you.
Okay. Do you have time for one more?
We can do one more.
Okay. Go for it.
I would like to talk about the algorithmic bias question, and you kind of have talked about this a little bit. Credit models may be neutral in design, right? It's you fit this little box. You have this, but the data reflects historical inequality, right?
Absolutely.
We know this is a fact. Can a system built on unequal data ever truly be considered fair?
Absolutely. I would say absolutely not. If the foundation is an error, every time you make more decisions, every time you expand, it tilts it in that same direction. It exacerbates the degree of the inequity for the consumer who's being served. And I would say that that's why you need to go back and have consequences, and that you need to fix the foundational problem in the first place, and then have consequences again. And then as you do that, then it builds on structure that's more balanced. I remember not that long ago where women had to take out banks and accounts in their husband's name. It's like,
that's right.
What about single
I've talked about that before.
And the biases, and I work with biases against fathers. And again, it's not usually in credit, but the biases in this system, all systems have biases, and anytime one person's hurt, then the system is at fault, and we need to find ways, reasonable ways, concrete ways, measurable ways to say, if this isn't working, this is where we are, this is where we want to be, how are we going to get there? And we all need to come together. And if the system doesn't want to, we have to have other parts of the system say, okay, you're not in charge anymore.
Right, right. That's excellent. Well, Neil, we really appreciate you coming on. And you heard it here first. He says he's going to come back. So that means we're going to hold you to that.
I'd be glad to.
This has been Give Me Credit. I'm going to please ask you to like, subscribe, ring that bell. You all know the drill. Follow us, follow along. We have upcoming episodes. We have further guests. And again, as you see, we're going to be inviting Neil back. You won't want to miss these. We're all things credit. We're diving in, as you know. Feel free to send us questions, comments, things that you want us to cover that maybe we haven't yet. We invite your input on all topics credit, how it affects your financial life. That's what we're here to do, to educate, to clarify, to give you the tools you need to work through this biased system. Thank you so much, Neil, for joining us. I really do appreciate it. I can't wait to see you again.
Well, thank you. Me too.
You know what?
I obviously love this discussion.
I know you do. I know you do. And you're good at it. You're good. Your ethics is what attracted me initially to you in a heterosexual way. I want to be real clear about that.
Yeah.
But I was going to follow that up by saying if I was there with you, I'd give you a kiss on the lips.
Yeah.
Okay, so be careful.
Because there's nothing wrong with that. Don't be biased.
No, there isn't.
No, there isn't.
You also have to know, Neil, that I'm not wearing pants.
Oh, okay, Johnny, that I didn't know, but I will say it was never ethical to take the brownies out of our dryer and eat them.
I was wondering when that was going to come up. We'll talk about that next time.
Yeah, we're going to need to know about that inside joke.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone. I'm J.S. Waldo, author of Mortgage Lending Explained, and our credit guru is John Mackey, author of Credit Genius. Again, you can find us both on Substack, creditgenius.substack.com, and myself at jswaldo.substack.com. Thank you again, Neil. Thanks for listening to Give Me Credit, all of you out there, and we hope everyone has a great day.
Great day, guys.
Put some pants on. Bye.